let's talk about maybe some action steps that you guys took, and you guys are impacting other families as well. So what were some things that you started to do to help your family unit?
Well, I think the first thing when this was happening, there was no Google, there was no internet. So it was hard to get information. So that was the first thing is, you know, the nice thing about me being a doctor is I went to, obviously medical school. So I started calling my classmates, ones that were pediatricians, one that were, psychiatrists, ones that were neurologists, and start asking questions. Where do I go? Where do I go? Where do I go? And then I felt comfortable taking him to the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, to Children's Hospital of Miami. We went to Boston Children's, and you just you know call up and say, "This is my child who looks at kids like this," because autism wasn't that common then. But I think the first thing is to try to find people like us in your community,
Mhm.
and we asked around, and so pretty soon we had a group of probably five core parents, that formed a club that nobody wants to be a member of, that their kids have autism, and as they learned something, they would tell us. As we learned something, they would tell them. For a new parent now, I think that the best thing to start would be the school system, because the school system probably always, has, speech therapy and occupational therapy, and then you can branch out from there.
Yeah, definitely. So community, I think there was one even chapter that was titled Chapter 8, Stronger Together. And you talk a lot about that. And I'm sure you and your wife felt alone at first and isolated and didn't know anybody else who had this, and everybody else's families looked perfect, and you didn't know what to do. So one thing is you recommend is getting some sort of community, getting a group, so you're not feeling alone and isolated.
Correct. It was interesting, going back and looking at it. Even my parents, stopped visiting us and started visiting my brothers and stuff. We always would joke they would,
Yeah.
drive up I-95, head to North Carolina, but not take the exit, to our
Right.
house. But,
That's
but,
funny.
but, and I don't want to throw my parents out there, but it was difficult. They were older, and my son could be difficult, and I'm sure it scared him, and
Yeah.
and and it scares other people. But if you're just compassionate, and the key is to always remember you and your wife are on the same team,
Hmm.
and to include the children,
Hmm.
because certainly, my son would bring friends home, and Marston would be Marston, and they would either have to accept it or they wouldn't be my son's friends.
Hmm.
But now it's amazing, you know, 25 years later, is those friends still look up Marston. My son lives in LA, 3,000 miles away. But, when we bump into somebody in Target or they see Marston, they remember Marston as a 3-year old, a 5-year old, an 8-year old. And they come up and say, hey, and interact with them and take them to a movie or something. So
Yeah.
it really kind of bonded everybody.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Um, and you started talking about this a little bit before the show, but as you mentioned, there's not just a lot of things on autism. I think you even said in the book that it didn't even date like that many years ago. It's not like some of these other diseases that there's all this research on, and I think all the time and every year, and they're trying to find out more information on the brain. The brain is such a magnificent thing that we all have. And so, talk to us about, as a doctor, what you have seen, because I'm sure that you've been researching and other doctors have been researching this. And what's some things that you're finding out?
Uh, well, I'll take you back a little bit further, and there was a couple of things that struck me, uh, just being in medicine. And the first is I took helped take care of an unfortunate kid at the time who was on the University of California, I think Berkeley track team, and he was at a track meet, and the hammer toss, went awry and hits this kid in the head, crushes his skull. By the time he gets to the emergency room, his skull is open, brain is coming out, blood's everywhere. I called the neurosurgeons. They said, get him up to the OR. We'll be there as soon as we can. So, I shave his head, I prep him, I get him ready. They come in and take care of everything. But I saw him, for weeks. He was in a coma in the ICU, and I was just making sure, that he was okay. I talked to his parents, and then, to be honest, I moved on and, was just um, doing my thing. And the sports pages in the old San Francisco Chronicle used to be green. They were called the green pages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was reading the green pages one Sunday morning, and there was an article about him that he had graduated and was doing well. And I couldn't believe it, because I would say at least a third of his brain was taken out at the operation.
Wow.
And so I called, my friend, the neurosurgeon. I said, "What happened?" He said, "Man, he was in a coma for 2 months. He woke up, he started therapy, and right now he's completely normal except a little left arm weakness."
Mm.
I mean, that's it. So I kept thinking, if there's a kid walking around with only 2/3 of a brain and he's a functioning member of society, my kid, who's got a full brain that's just somehow not right, ought to be able to get fixed.
Right.
And that was my mantra, you know. And the other one is not that important, but I took care of somebody who was shot through the arm, and a couple of nerves were transected. And, I fixed the nerves, and, he shouldn't have been able to move his hand. And like on post-op day 3, he started moving his hands. And everybody kept telling me, you must have misdiagnosed him. These nerves couldn't have been cut. And I'm going like, no, I was there. You weren't there. I was there. These nerves were cut, and now, they're working. And when we studied him with an EMG, electromyography, other nerves had kind of taken up the function of the nerve that had been transected. And so I'm going, if the body can figure out another way to do this, then my kid should be able to get fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And blind people, they can do Braille. If you run your hand on Braille, you can't tell there's 24 little nubs. But when they do that, the back of their head, their occipital lobe, where their eyes are supposed to go, that lights up. So they're using what used to be the part of the brain for vision, now goes to their fingertips. And that's why they can do it. So early on, I knew the brain was very plastic. And I knew that there had to be some way to mold that brain to essentially fix the problem, or modulate the problem.
Mm. Yeah.
And so that's what we started to do. We made a big list, Chris and I did, of what his strengths were and what his weaknesses were. And his weakness was talking. His weakness was walking. He had difficulty breathing because his chest wasn't developed. And we just started picking one of these off. Once a week, we'd make a phone call. We'd try to find somebody. And we found, a wonderful group of people. We went to a place in Pennsylvania called the Institute of Human Potential, which, regular doctors kind of think it probably borders on crazy. But, I went there and I spoke with the founder, a guy named Glenn Dolman, who had really no formal education as a doctor, but, had a professorial position at a medical school. And that's because in World War II, a couple of his friends were shot in the head, and they both survived. And so they came back to his hometown, and he ended up taking care of them. And he started writing down what it took to take care of them. Pretty soon he went into physical therapy. And then he, kind of founded the whole school of neurorehabilitation, just from, this post-World War II experience of his. And so I had him evaluate Marston, and he gave me a program, and he told me about other people. He had trouble with vision. We had written that down. I made a phone calls. Finally, I found this guy who, his name was Harry Wax. He ran something called the Visual and Conceptual Development Program in Washington, D.C. But it turns out he evaluates all the eyes at the NFL Combine. He's the one that figures out, if when an NFL quarterback or a presentative draft pick can put a pair of glasses on that distorts his vision and throw a beanbag in a garbage can. Mm. How long does it take him to figure out he's got to trust his mind and not his vision? Mm. So here's an upper level guy that understands how to make eyes work. And so he gave us a program, and we just kept one after another. And I think one of the things that I would, tell our audience um, is obviously this can be expensive, and my insurance didn't cover it. But the one thing I did do was I went to our local university, University of North Florida. I went to their Department of Education, and I just asked for a list of students who are going to become special needs teachers. And I just started calling. I said, "Who wants a job?"
Mm-hmm.
And I found some young men and some young girls who went up to Pennsylvania and learned this program, who went to Washington D.C. and learned this program. And so for $10 or $12 an hour, they would come into our home and do this with Marston, which would be much less expensive than taking him to a professional occupational therapist or something like that, and paying $100 a visit.
Mm-hmm.
And they were actually learning and becoming better, teachers, eventual teachers. And we were getting somebody that had a passion for it and ended up, loving our child.
Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.